Hi, this is Mark from AuditTrails. In this episode of AuditTrails, I'll be discussing NIST 853 AC-2 controls and all of the moderate enhancements, that being AC-2 1, Enhancement 2, Enhancement 3, and Enhancement 4. So one of the things about the AC-2 as compared to the previous discussion about AC-1 is the one controls, AC1, CA1, AT1, etc. Those are all policy and procedures based. So AC1 was policies and procedures about account management. A lot of times organizations may have great policies, but they don't necessarily do what they say that they're doing. And that's what these other controls are. These other controls is making sure they're doing what they say they're doing. Now AC2, if you take a look at it, it's a bit. There's a lot of stuff and a few enhancements. Now the good thing about AC2 is it's not actually very complicated. There's just a lot of stuff, a lot of things, but overall it's not a huge heavy lift. So I'll just jump right in and talk about this now. So the AC2 control, the first item A talks about the organization needs to identify and select the following types of information system accounts to support organizational missions and business functions. Now this is organization defined system account types. So what does this mean in plain English? Well, really it means that the organization needs to figure out what type of accounts need to exist on the system. It could be very simple. It could be we need an administrator and plain users. It could be complex. We need HR accounts, we need privileged accounts, non-privileged accounts, developers, etc. So there could be lots of different types of system account types. But what's important is the organization can define it however they deem it appropriate. So they need to identify and select these, number one. Now, one of the things that we see a lot that's often very helpful, generally speaking, it's a good idea to have, and in some later controls you're required to have it anyway, is something called an RBAC. An RBAC goes a long way with helping this, or helping address this. An RBAC is role-based access controls. Now I pulled up, not the best example I found on the internet, showing an example of role-based access controls. So role-based access controls typically on the individual rows are the different types of roles that an organization may have. Now, these are actually reversed. I'm going to start the whole thing over. So in this case, in this example, these roles, there are different roles that an organization has. So, and you could do it either way. You can have roles on the top and resources or permissions or applications on the left-hand side, or vice versa. But typically, one of the axes is the type of role. Now they're not people, they're not job titles, they're roles. Employee, maybe a hiring manager, payroll staff, payroll admin, HR manager, executive staff. So typically an RBAC is going to have different roles an organization has, and then the other axis is the resources that they may or may not have permission for. In this case, this is for an HR system, postings, resumes, applications, notes, files, and paychecks. So paychecks is a good example. An employee may only have essentially read access for their own paycheck, but the payroll staff can create, read, or update paychecks for everybody, but the payroll admin actually has delete privileges too. So what's very nice is you can see, and obviously an applicant or the hiring manager has no access to any payroll or paycheck relevant stuff. So this is a very good tool. Again, it's called an RBAC, role-based access control, which gives a very good visual as far as understanding the permissions. For an auditor, it's very, very helpful. For an organization, it's very helpful because they have a template, they have something to go on as far as what permissions are needed across the entire organization. A lot of times, these permissions and authorizations a lot of times the problem that organizations have is they don't even know what permissions they even need, let alone know who's assigned to what. So just to jump back to AC-2, so the organization should identify and select, and they need to define what type of account types do we need to have. The organization should assign account managers for information system accounts. So there needs to be somebody in charge of creating, deleting, etc. The organization should establish conditions for group and role membership. It could be as simple as you need to be an employee, you need to have a need to know or need to be in a particular group or a role. A system administrator, his job function is XYZ, so maybe that's a condition. Maybe a condition is that they get approval from their manager, things like that. Then the next thing is that the organization specifies authorized users of the information system, group role membership, and access authorizations and other attributes for each account. So again, they need to specify who are the authorized users for these accounts. Something like this is as simple as a lot of organizations will have a ticketing system. So whenever there's a new employee or an employee needs to get some additional privileges or an account made for them, there's a ticketing system. So that's going to specify, hey, this user, John Smith, needs these permissions, or John Smith needs these type of authorizations or this type of privilege or account. Requires approvals. This is one thing when we're doing audits. Is one thing I'm usually very focused on is that approval piece. Now, one of the things when you're auditing is there's a lot of gray areas. Just even looking at this stuff, establishing conditions for group and role membership. That's kind of a gray area. So there is still, even with this guidance and these very specific and a large number of items in the control description, there is a lot of gray area. There's a lot of subjectivity. One of the things that I try emphasizing and really focusing on is requiring approval for these requests to create information system accounts. So, the organization needs to require approvals, and the organization needs to define the people that are going to be approving these accounts and whatnot. So just jumping back to the whole gray area, and there's a lot of generalities to some of this stuff, is when we're doing audits and assessments, I'm not the type of auditor that throws the book at an organization and is going to go and look at every single thing, and I'll get to that in the next one. I really try and believe in helping an organization build their security program, not play a game of gotcha. Now, don't get me wrong. It does depend on the type of assessment or audit that you're doing. If you are doing it very specifically for compliance purposes, if you're a federal auditor and a department or an organization or contractor needs to meet it, and this is for highly classified type information, well, things are going to be a lot more strict. Whereas if it's just an internal assessment or just an internal compliance audit, things like that, where we're just really more trying to find out the gaps and we're trying to fill in these gaps, I'm often a little hesitant at throwing the book, for lack of a better term, at an organization, because if you give them too many findings, they're not going to be able to do that. We all know there's only so many resources and so much time, so they're not going to be able to remediate all of these issues. So while you may want to go and list all of this stuff and all of these problems, it not only does it not necessarily do any good, I think a lot of times it hurts, because an organization doesn't frankly know what to focus on because they can only do so much. So one of the things that we try doing is taking baby steps with an organization to help build their security program, taking the most critical and most important elements and having them focus on that. And then maybe next year or in 6 months when we reassess, we'll go into a little bit more of the nitty gritty. So one of the things I look for is this requiring approvals for requests to create information system accounts. Now this alone is very generic. Approval, it can be done many different ways. You could require approval. It could be an email. A lot of times an organization doesn't have or doesn't think to have a proper security program in place to address this control. I'll ask them. A lot of times it's like pulling teeth. Tell me what happens when you have a new employee. How does an account get created? What's that process? Oh, well, HR will go and email their manager, and their manager puts a request in for an account to be created. Well, that really is an approval process. That's an approval type. So some organizations may simply be using email for approvals. Some organizations, what I typically try pushing organizations and to have is a ticketing system. One of the reasons why is ticketing system covers not just something like this, but it covers a lot of controls across the board. So some organizations or that we look for is, hey, if you have a new employee, or if you have someone that needs an account created, they put in a ticket, and when the ticket gets put in, their manager or whoever that the appropriate person is will comment in the ticket or approve the ticket, something like that. So the next item, F, creates, enables, modifies, disables, and removes information system accounts in accordance with organization-defined procedures or conditions. So this is what I was talking about earlier, one of the baby step pieces. Requiring approval, I think, is an important thing. People need to know what's going on. There needs to be some level of approval. So when I'm looking at an organization, to me, this is a higher priority, requiring approval. Creates, enables, modifies, disables, removes information system accounts. Well, number one, it's in accordance with their procedures or conditions. So their procedures might simply be very generic, very simple. Hey, the system administrator goes in and creates the account. It could be as simple as that. So, or that it could be very specific procedures or conditions. Only after XYZ happens and the system administrator gets a form filled in triplicate does the system administrator need to log into this machine, take this step, then do the next step, etc. So it could be highly detailed. And for me, I'm going to look for what's more important is that there's some procedure. It could be very simple, and that they're at least consistent with it. There's a quote that says, "Don't let the best be the enemy of the good." A lot of times people want to nail down these procedures and have them be perfect, and they spend so long in trying to make the perfect procedure that they go for years not following any procedure because it's not perfect. For me as an auditor, I would rather have them have a procedure, even if it's simple and not perfect, but that they're consistent with it, because you can always modify those procedures. And the same thing, creates, enables, modifies, disables, and removes. If we're talking baby steps, a lot of times the first assessment, I'm going to focus on maybe just creating and disabling, making sure they have that down pat. And then maybe the next assessment, the modifying and removing. It does depend on the organization. A lot of times organizations, they have these all either taken care of or not taken care of. But if I had to pick and choose, in terms of baby steps, in terms of helping build a security program, I'm going to be focusing on creating and disabling before the removing, modifying, and enabling. Monitors the use of information system accounts. So this is another gray area, another general thing. Monitors the use of information system accounts. Monitoring is a very generic term. Does monitoring mean automated monitoring, some automated system that's going to go and email whenever something happens with the accounts, and et cetera, et cetera? Or can monitoring simply be a system administrator once a week once a day, once a month, going in and taking a look at those information system accounts. And notifies the account managers. Now this ties in with kind of the monitoring piece, and it's still very generic. Notifies account managers. What does notify mean? Can it be an email? Can it be a ticket? Can it be an automated email, a manual email, etc.? So a lot of it is organization defined. A lot of it times it's not perfect. Something, again, is better than nothing, with the goal of continually getting better and better. So what are we monitoring and notifying about? Well, number one, when accounts are no longer required. So monitoring and notifying when accounts are no longer required is sometimes or oftentimes a manual process. Maybe every month or so, or every 3 months, every quarter, every 6 months, there's a manual audit of the accounts. Here's a list of all the accounts, and maybe the system administrator and the managers go through them in a monthly or so meeting and just confirms that all these accounts are still good and valid. When users are terminated or transferred. So there should be some sort of notification when a user is terminated or transferred. And when information system usage or need to know changes. So that's even more generic. If there is some difference in usage, or maybe somebody just got pulled off a project, and that project needed access to certain information or certain data, and now that person isn't on the project. Well, their need to know has changed. So authorizes access to the information system. So we talked about approval here, and we're talking about authorizing here. So we're authorizing access to the information system based on valid access authorization, intended system usage, and other attributes. So that the system needs to actually authorize. The system is going to require a username and a password. That authorization should also be based on what's the intended system usage. What's the purpose of going into the system, and obviously other attributes as required by the organization. So an organization may have certain requirements or business needs for authorizing an account. Reviews accounts for compliance with account management requirements at an organization-defined frequency. Now, typically speaking, a lot of these organization-defined frequencies, I want to see at least once a year. I think some stuff is perfectly fine once a year. Some stuff needs to be anywhere from daily to weekly to monthly to quarterly to every 6 months. It does depend on the specific control and what the sensitivity to the information or that particular control is. So we want to make sure that we're reviewing accounts. As an auditor, what I'm going to look for, I look for evidence of reviewing accounts. So ideally, an organization the system administrator is going to have as simple as a spreadsheet, whether it's a spreadsheet or a ticket in a ticket system, that basically essentially says, yeah, on this date, I reviewed the accounts, everything was okay, and here are my notes, or I reviewed all the accounts, and these 2 accounts we need to remove, and I opened up this ticket to remove the accounts, things like that. So that's what I'm looking for when I'm looking for evidence of reviewing the accounts for compliance. Now, I do believe in a trust but verify type of assessment or auditing. I'm going to try to assume that whoever I'm doing an audit of, that they are not blatantly forging and lying. I'm going to ask for evidence. So, for example, reviewing accounts for compliance with account management requirements, I'm going to ask, show me evidence of whoever it is that account manager reviewing accounts. So show me the spreadsheet. And ideally, that spreadsheet is going to be this running spreadsheet. So it's going to have If they review it every month, it's going to have an entire year's worth of every single month of reviewing accounts and notes. Is it possible that that organization or that person completely forged and completely made up that document the day before I went in and did the assessment? Yes. I'm not going in assuming that. I'm not going to make sure they do an MD5 hash and of the document, and I compare the hashes and all that crazy stuff. I think there needs to be some level of trust when you're doing an assessment. But I want documentation, and I want to make sure that the documentation is reasonable. And then the last thing is establishes a process for reissuing shared or group account credentials if deployed when individuals are removed from the group. So one of the things that 853 recently did is they used to not be supportive of shared or group accounts. Every individual needed to have their own individual account. Lately, NIST has kind of changed a little bit and relaxed that requirement to, yeah, you can have shared accounts, except if you are going to have shared accounts, and don't get me wrong, me as an auditor, I still try to make sure and emphasize that shared accounts should be an exception and not a rule, because it does increase the complexity, increases the risk of an organization. So I really try pushing an organization to not have any shared or group accounts if possible. If they do, and in this particular case, they need to have a process for reissuing that password. So whenever it talks about credentials, essentially we're talking about passwords. So establishing a process for reissuing shared or group account credentials. So if maybe all the system administrators have a root account or an administrator account where they're all going to have that password, well, we need to have a process for reissuing that password if one of our 5 sysadmins are terminated or leaves or whatnot. That's also why having shared accounts significantly increases credentials. Now, one of the things that I do try looking for, or at least I wouldn't say pushing, but maybe emphasizing, is nowadays what helps with a lot of credential password requirements and information sharing, credential sharing requirements is password keeper type of applications, such as KeyPass or LastPass. So if you're using something like LastPass, the reissuing the credentials is a very simple thing to do. Every administrator is going to have a shared LastPass folder. So there's one location for that administrator or root or group credential, and somebody just needs to change it in one location, and then whenever any of the administrators need to log in, they open up LastPass, and there's the new credential. So jumping to the control enhancements. So AC-2 enhancement 1, 2, 3, and 4. We'll quickly go through them. These aren't that complicated. As I warned you all, AC-2, it's not complicated, but there's a lot of stuff. AC-2 enhancement 1 talks about the organization employs automated mechanisms to support the management of information system accounts. So this is the first time we're talking about automated. Up until the regular control, the main control, all of this stuff does not have to be automated. It could be manual. But enhancement 1 now enforces the use of automated mechanisms. Now, it's still very generic. Automated mechanisms to support the management of information system accounts. What does that mean? It kind of mean anything. Their guidance talks about the use of automated mechanisms can include, for example, using email or text messaging to automatically notify account managers when users are terminated or transferred. It could be as simple as that. It could be as simple as you could set up rules and whatever system whether it's a Linux system, a Microsoft system, an Office 365 that basically says whenever an account changes just email these people. Or maybe the HR department, when they terminate somebody as part of their intranet, or whether they're using SharePoint or something, it could be as simple as whenever a person gets terminated, maybe not the account gets removed, but simply when a user is terminated, then something will automatically email. So it could be as simple as that, or it could be automated mechanisms which are always monitoring for accounts that are disabled, or accounts that get locked out, or whenever an account gets created, the operating system or the domain controller automatically emails people. So there is a lot of automated stuff that can be done. In this case, again, we usually try to take the baby steps and see, is there any automated mechanism there is in place, and as an organization realizes the benefit that something like this automated mechanism does for them, then they usually have the ability and are willing to expand it to handle more stuff. So AC-2 Enhancement 2, the information automatically, and this is interesting because the organization can select. So the information system automatically removes or disables, essentially. So it could be both, it could be one. So the information system automatically removes or disables temporary and emergency accounts after an organization-defined time period for each type of account. So this is specifically talking and focused on temporary or emergency accounts. A temporary account and an emergency account should not last for an unknown or undetermined amount of time. There should be, the organization should say, listen, if we're going to create a temporary account or an emergency account, it can only have a maximum lifetime of 30 days. Or a week, or even a day. So in this case, this is addressing a couple of things. We're talking about and addressing this idea and this concept of temporary accounts and emergency accounts. These are not your normal standard accounts. And sometimes, or a lot of times, these temporary emergency accounts are created for third parties. Maybe you have your vendor that comes in, whether it's your IT vendor or your support vendor for if you have a large NAS system or whatnot, and they need to remotely connect in to do some work. So that's an example of a temporary or an emergency account. So the information system should automatically remove or disable. It's up to the organization which one or both that they're going to do, and it has to be automatically done. So a lot of times, this is as simple as nowadays, for example, with a domain controller with Microsoft, you can set up an account that simply automatically goes away and only has a certain amount of lifetime. So in a sense, it's built into the operating system. So it can be as simple as that, all the way to there are applications and software that you can run on your system that is always checking. So organizations may do that to, number one, be the one and only solution for automatically removing the accounts. Maybe we're not having the domain controller and relying on the operating system to remove it, but you have some third party that every day or every hour is looking to see, hey, what accounts are there, and do any of these accounts need to be deleted or disabled? And it's that third party software is going to go and disable or delete it. Or some organizations, they rely on the operating system, so they create the account, label it as a temporary account, tell the operating system it's only good for 30 days, rely on the operating system to delete it, but they still run the third-party software to kind of audit the systems. So that third-party software is going and making sure there aren't any accounts that some way, somehow slip through the cracks. The AC-2 Enhancement 3, this is another automated thing. The information system automatically disables inactive accounts after an organization-defined time period. So we're not talking, so previously we're talking about temporary emergency accounts. So the temporary emergency accounts are accounts that from day one, the organization says this account should only last a certain amount of time. Enhancement 3 talks about inactive accounts, all accounts, normal users, administrators, etc. If there's any accounts that are inactive, inactive means somebody has not logged into the system in a certain amount of time. What's that time? The organization can define it. Maybe it's 30 days, maybe it's 6 months, maybe it's a year. So the information needs to automatically disable an inactive account after whatever time period the organization defined. Now, with a lot of these items, in this case, organization defined time period, how is that time period defined, or where is that time period defined? That time period is defined in the AC-1 documentation, the policies and procedures. So whenever we're talking about an organization defining anything, that pretty much means that has to be in your policies and procedures, which is covered by AC-1. So, and the same thing with automatically disabling inactive accounts. It could be as simple as relying on the operating system and your domain controller. And for one example, if you're using AWS has the ability too that says after X amount of time, disable the account. The other thing to take into account, we're talking about disabling an inactive account. We're not talking about removing or deleting an inactive account. You don't need to go to that extent. You just need to disable the account. AC-2 Enhancement 4. The information system automatically audits account creation, modification, enabling, disabling, and removal actions, and notifies organization-defined personnel or roles. So, again, organization-defined personnel and roles means a couple of things. Number one, this information needs to be in the AC policies and procedures. Who are the organization-defined personnel or roles? Except the organization. So this is saying, hey, if the information needs to automatically audit all these account actions and notify, it could be personnel, so we could say, notify the system administrator and notify Mike, or the policy could say notify a particular role, notify HR, things like that. So the information system automatically audits the account creation, modification, enabling, disabling, and removal actions. So this kind of ties in, I talked about before, for AC-2 enhancement 2. There's some organizations will get some third-party software to kind of do that auditing to make sure the operating system is doing what it should be doing in terms of automatically terminating accounts after a certain amount of time. The reason why some organizations do get some third-party software is for these other features that they need anyway. So all of these items are focused on notifying if accounts get changed. So if somebody goes in and does something to an account, creates an account, modifies account, enables account, disables account, or removing an account, notifying people. So a lot of times this is pretty much the result. Any of these actions are typically the result of something manual being done, unless of course the automated components here. So it's this level of auditing that this enhancement is focused on, and notifying. So as an auditor, I'm going to go in and I'm going to ask for, show me an example. We're talking about notifying, so it's probably via email or a ticket or something equivalent. So as an auditor, I'm going to go in and I'm going to say, show me an example email that provided this information. Now, there's different types of software. Some software will always be looking. Whenever anything changes, boom, you get an email. There's some software that simply runs every night, or even every week. Because one of the things this doesn't talk about is how often. It simply says automatically. So there are some organizations that, now I'm not a fan of once a week or less than once a week. I prefer once a day, where the system administrator may simply get an email every single day saying, these were the actions that were done over the past 24 hours. These accounts were created, these accounts were modified. It could be as simple as that. Just that a nightly email or even a weekly email saying this is all the account actions that were done, or it could be real time. So I know that was a lot. I'll give everybody a bit of break. Hopefully this helped people, and we'll see you in the next session.